But welcome and happy World Frog Day. My name is Sierra Hastings. I am the Communications Director with Sageland Collaborative, and you are here at our 2026 Utah HerpSearch Volunteer Training. Thank you for being here. Today we are going to learn how you can get involved in amphibian and reptile conservation right here in Utah through community science. And on the next slide. So today, just a brief agenda. We're hoping to go about 45 minutes today, but maybe longer, probably not shorter, but that's okay. So we're going to introduce our amazing team. We have some great biologists from the state and from our staff here, as well as Utah Tech University. We're going to go over how to participate, how to photograph SERPs, and how you can be safe while doing so. We're going to go over our data collection app, so the protocols that we use out in the field and that we're going to ask you to use. We're also going to talk about some of our focus species that we are really interested in learning more about, and some frequently asked questions. This is a webinar, so your cameras are off for this entire thing. That's not that we don't want to see you, it's just, it's easier this way. So take what you need throughout this training, go get water, take a bathroom break. This is being recorded, so it will be available in our newsletters and on the project page afterwards, so you don't need to worry about missing anything. And if you have any questions throughout the training, either throw them in the chat or I don't know if we have a Q&A here. I'm not seeing one on my screen. If you see one, throw it in there. Otherwise, throw it in the chat and we will either answer it throughout or at the end of the training. But yeah, that said, I'm going to pass it over to Mary to start introductions.
Unmute. Sorry about that. Thank you for that, Sierra. Yeah, my name is Mary Pendergast. I work as an ecologist for Sageland Collaborative.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Hoekstra. I'm the Native Herpetology Coordinator for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources.
Hi, I'm Megan Kepis. I'm a herpetologist and a professor at Utah Tech University in St. George.
All right. Well, we always like to start off with an acknowledgement for those of us that are based in the state of Utah, where we live, work, and recreate on the ancestral and traditional lands of the Ute, Goshute, Paiute, and Shoshone. And we just want to offer this land acknowledgement to recognize Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. We're collaborating with academic and government partners to fill basic data gaps on where a species is distributed and what condition their habitats are in. And so in some cases, the work lends itself to engaging the community scientists when survey protocols can be standardized and provided in the form of a public training. So before we get started with today's training, I wanted to just note again, the presentation's recorded. You can always go back and review it. And for anyone who's registered for the live webinar, you are automatically going to receive emails about the project. So for folks watching this as a recording, you can scan this QR code here to sign up for the project newsletters. Well, they'll come to you as emails. And with that, I'm excited to share some background on the need for this work and about how to participate in the Utah HerpSearch project, which is a community science-powered program helping us put amphibian and reptile species on the map, especially those in conservation need. The project is a partnership among Division of Wildlife Resources, Utah Tech University, and Sageland Collaborative. So with that, a word from our vital partner, Alyssa Hoekstra, Herpetology Coordinator at the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. I think you're on mute.
I just realized that. Said it. All right. Once again, there are 7 ecoregions identified in Utah that influence the distribution of herpetofauna across the state, largely due to elevation, temperature, and weather conditions, and plant community richness on the landscape. The greatest and highest number of amphibians and reptiles are found within the Mojave Basin and Range ecoregion in the southwest corner of the state. The Colorado Plateau also has a high number of amphibian species, which is the eastern part of the state. The Wyoming Basin and Wasatch and Uinta Mountains ecoregions have the fewest number of reptile species, again, largely due to the reasons I mentioned previously about the elevation and temperature. And on the next slide, the main objective for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources is to manage native species and their habitats to prevent listing under the Endangered Species Act. In order to receive federal funds for conservation management, each state and U.S. territory has to have a wildlife action plan that identifies key habitats and species. Every species across taxonomic groups is considered for adding to the list of species of greatest conservation need under the Wildlife Action Plan. And out of the 68 herpetological species native to Utah, 4 amphibians and 4 reptile species are considered species of greatest conservation need. In this latest version of the Wildlife Action Plan that was just recently published this year, a new list was created to add species of greatest information need, which are species that are designated species of greatest information need by qualifying as a species of greatest conservation need. However, the lack of current scientific knowledge for a given taxon or information critical to understanding its conservation needs, which includes ecological uncertainty, distributional uncertainty, and taxonomic uncertainty that prevent it from being designated as a species of greatest conservation need. And each species can fall under 1, 2, or all 3 of those information uncertainties.
Thanks for that, Alyssa. For this project, as we approach that long list of reptiles and amphibians in the state, and then specifically that list that we know are in conservation need, we're likely going to just refer to them as herps moving forward. But we can see that a lot of these species are challenging to find on the landscape. We often have a limited understanding of their distributions. So we don't know what habitat they're using or the condition of that habitat. And they often have variable seasonal activity. So it totally depends on the weather, season to season. And it often requires a lot of survey effort and hours to even detect them on the landscape. So with all of these challenges to data collection, Sageland and our partners knew this work could be a good fit for community science engagement. With that, I would like to ask Megan Kepis, our crucial partner at Utah Tech University, to describe the important work she and her students have done with community science gathered data.
Hi, I'm Megan, as I mentioned earlier. Hopefully you all can hear me just fine. I think it's important that you know what's happening with your data, how it's being used. So in our first sort of phase of this project, we were looking at additional records that we could find for species of conservation need as well as species of information need. So, biologists are out certain times of the year doing dedicated surveys, but people are out in all seasons at all times of day. And so it really gives us a lot more information, and we're able to capture those records across the entire year. So it is a lot of records. The map is showing you individual records from all over the state, and then the bar graph is showing you the different species, and so common species are found more commonly. Then we'll go on to the next slide. Recently, we've been taking a few aspects of the project further. So we are using records of animals that are found dead on the road, that have been hit by cars, to inform the state about roadways and particularly corridors or sections of road where animals might be crossing more frequently or at certain times of the year. And that way the state can take measures if needed to make it a safer area for animals to travel. We also have gone out and looked for certain species. So the desert iguana is a species that we had just 2 records of it in Utah. And we were able to go out with a group of community volunteers and actually find a population that appears to be thriving in southern Utah.
Thanks for that, Alyssa and Megan. We appreciate it. I'm sure there's lots of questions for you coming in and at the end as experts in herpetofauna. So thanks for being here. So with all that information, how can you help HERPS and participate in this project? So we'll be discussing 2 ways to contribute your observations. And the first is through the iNaturalist application. And the second is through the Survey 123 ArcGIS application. We'll go into more detail for these apps later, but we wanted to clarify up front that we're asking if you just see any reptile or amphibian while you're out and about, to go ahead and record that observation in iNaturalist. And we'll talk about taking a photo or taking a recording if you end up hearing a herp. If you sign up to do a specific survey location, which we'll show you how to do that in more detail, we're asking that you use the Survey 123 application. Or if you're out herping often, looking for amphibians and reptiles, and you're aware of a sensitive area or a species location where you're concerned about keeping that location private, and you only want to share that with state biologists trying to conserve the species, then please also use Survey 123 for that. You may want to go ahead and download iNaturalist if you haven't already. So we have the QR codes there that will take you right to the application specific for your device. Once you download iNaturalist, please join the Herps of Utah project within that application. So that helps streamline getting the data where it needs to go. So not just in iNaturalist in general, but go ahead and join that Herps of Utah project as well. And once you join, please take the step of going to your membership preferences and select yes for notifications about the project. And please select yes to trust the project administrators. That's Alyssa and Megan and myself. And that way we can see your observation locations and have access to the data you gather. iNaturalist will mask the specific locations though for the public. You can always refer back to this video and the Herps of Utah project page for resources on collecting data and using these applications, learning about the focal species. If you haven't already, you can sign up to receive email updates about the project. You'll also learn how to complete a more targeted survey. If you scroll down farther on the Utah HerpSearch project page, you'll see the Choose Your Own Adventure map. And here you have the option to select specific locations to survey for species where we are lacking information. There's also a link, if you scroll down on that same page where the map is, to sign up for these locations and date ranges in early, mid, and late breeding season. So each of these locations shows up 3 times to reflect those 3 early, mid, and late portions of the breeding season. And the reason we do this is so we can increase the chances of seeing adults, eggs, and tadpoles. And we ask that you collect data using the Survey 123 application for these dedicated site visits. So you can grab the code right there, and it'll show up again and again to download the Survey 123 app. If you want to grab that now, you can. You'll also have a chance to do it later. This year, we're asking that if you complete the targeted survey, and we'll talk about why they're a little more targeted for our focus species soon. We want you to do this even if you don't see reptiles and amphibians, because information about where you visited is still very helpful to our project objectives, capturing things like how much time has been volunteered, where folks have looked, and what the habitat looks like. Should we be going back to promising looking habitat even if you didn't detect a frog or a toad or other species we're looking for? Was it difficult to access certain areas? And should we let professional biologists know on the team to take a closer look? So please, if you visited these sites, even if you don't see a herp, please still complete that survey. And we'll talk more about that later. So we'll be going into further detail on how to actually gather these data and collect a survey, but we want to share this exciting incentive this year to complete at least 2 dedicated survey observations in Survey 123, and you'll receive a limited edition northern leopard frog enamel pin. So that's just this year's pin. Very exciting. Okay, so now for some details on photographing herps and safety in the field. So just as a reminder, we have just under 70 recognized herp species in Utah, and that includes snakes, lizards, tortoises, frogs, toads, and one species of salamander. We're asking that anytime you see a reptile or amphibian that you take a photo, or in the case of frogs, if you hear a call, go ahead and take the audio recording. And here we have some guidance on the easiest way to do that to get a positive identification on different species. So for frogs and toads, we recommend approaching them slowly and taking a picture without handling them. The best images are not in hand. Images that show the back and the side of their face are often the most helpful for identification. For toads, getting a good angle on the top or the side of the head can help with identification so you can see the different ridges and glands they have on their heads. For lizards, being able to see the side of the face can be really helpful to get a good look at the different markings and the scale structures. For snakes, again, images of the back and the side of the face or head, as well as having those in enough detail to see the scales of the face around the eye, nostrils, and mouth, are often the most helpful for identifying snake species. And a special note on snakes, please keep at least 10 feet away from snakes unless you're sure they're not venomous. That means taking care also not to lean in closer accidentally while you take that photo. So no reaching into holes or flipping rocks either. Again, please never risk your safety for a photo. Trips, slips, and falls are the most common injuries I've seen in the field. Just last year, I was walking with Alyssa through tall grass around a wet meadow and tripped on a big log and went down. So put caution and your safety before getting those herp pictures, please. A word on handling herps here. We prefer you not pick up any amphibians, especially for their safety, because the oils from our skin, the sunscreen and the creams we put on really are easily absorbed into their skin and can be harmful to them. And although the common chytrid fungus that amphibians have is not harmful to humans, we can spread that fungus to different frogs or toads if we're handling different individuals multiple times in the field. So no need to stress them out or put them at risk unless you're part of a biologist-led crew who has gloves for you to handle them. Maybe they're taking swab samples or things like that, and you're being directed to do that with gloved hands. Okay, now that we've discussed safety and photographing herps, we're moving on to how to contribute data and use iNaturalist and Survey 123 applications. So when you join the Herps of Utah project page, just a reminder, please be sure to change your membership settings to receive those notifications and allow the administrators to see the coordinates or your specific locations. Remember, if you're just out and about and you see a reptile or amphibian while you're hiking or recreating, or maybe you work outside and you're noticing it, please go ahead and use iNaturalist to add that photo, any reptile or amphibian you see, to the Herps of Utah project. You can also add a video or photo or screenshot that you already have saved to your phone, so you don't need to do it directly in the app. If you hear a frog or toad calling, but you can't see it, you can also record audio in iNaturalist. So sometimes it can be difficult to navigate wetlands and get eyes on frogs when you're doing surveys, but luckily many frog species will call, and each species has their own unique way of communicating that allows us to identify them without even seeing them. This is similar to bird species having a unique call and avid birders being able to identify them without seeing the actual bird. So iNaturalist allows users to record calls and sounds of species to identify them. So please go ahead and follow these steps to record any frog calls you may hear while conducting the survey. Let's see. Let me just go back one here. So you open the iNaturalist app, and then you'll notice when you click the plus sign to add a new observation, you should see a couple options there that pop up. So you can click record sound, and it will prompt you to access the audio on your device. And then you'll see a black screen with a red recording button at the bottom. So press that recording button when you're ready to record the frog call, and press stop when you have maybe a couple repeats of that frog calling. And then you can fill out any details just like you would with a photo observation about the location or comments you want to add to that observation in iNaturalist. So moving on from using iNaturalist for just any herps you happen to come across, we now have some background on the focal species and why we're particularly interested in understanding where their current distribution is on the landscape. And this is why we're asking you to use the Survey 123 application for their observations. So here you can see the extent of the continental range for the Columbia spotted frog. And you'll notice the map for Utah provided by NatureServe indicates that its populations are imperiled. You can see the extent of the continental range for northern leopard frog is much larger, but also notice that in Utah, the map NatureServe provides indicates the populations are vulnerable, which is one step down from that imperiled status. In Utah, the known distribution of the two species is very similar. Columbia spotted frog is only in 3 disjunct areas, so pretty disconnected areas in the West Desert, and then portions of the Wasatch Front. Although the West Desert population appears to be stable, the Wasatch Front population has suffered some drastic reductions in both abundance and distribution as a result of fragmentation and habitat destruction, and both populations are considered to be threatened. A new population was discovered last year in the central region, which is exciting, and we still don't understand how many populations we have in Utah. And that's why we've turned to the community scientists to help us understand better both where the leopard frog and spotted frog are on the landscape. So we chose these two species as our focus species, and the Choose Your Own Adventure map was developed so that we can guide our volunteers to some targeted places. Our regional biologists and partners identified these areas as suitable habitat for the species, which is represented by these blue grid cells on the map. The circles within the grid cells are parking areas for easy accessibility. Eventually, we'd like to add other species to this map, including the western toad and other species listed as in greatest conservation need that Alyssa was describing. Before I zoom in on the map, which I'll show you access to in a minute, I wanted to point out that we have some locations for all levels of experience and accessibility. So you can see we have lots of locations in the central Wasatch and northern portions of the state that can be accessed by road as well as well-known hiking trailheads. But we also have some scattered locations in the West Desert that would be for someone interested in doing some camping or more remote surveying. So if you're interested in going beyond adding georeference photos just to iNaturalist, just anecdotally as you're out, opportunistically as you're out and about, you can help with this more focused effort for species of conservation need by going to the Utah HerpSearch website here. And then if you scroll down, you'll see the map towards the bottom of the website with some guidance on how to use the map. You'll be able to zoom into the map such that you can see the grid cells, and these sites represent, again, that potentially suitable habitat for some of Utah's overlooked species in conservation need. And many of them are very cryptic, so that's why we need your help. So here's how you use the map. You choose the highlighted grid cell, whether it's a convenient location or maybe an area that you're interested in camping in. You get to choose your own adventure. We ask that you always head out with a buddy to survey suitable habitat within the grid cell, taking note of habitat conditions and the presence or lack of presence of herp species in the area. If you find herps while you're surveying, please do take those photos, audio recordings, and upload them to Survey 123. And we'll talk a little bit more about what happens within the app later. Some of these grid cells have well-known trailheads and parking areas. They're indicated by those circles again. And you can click on this and it will send you, the link will send you right to a Google Maps location. And just as a reminder, this map includes starting locations based on known locations of habitat preferences for the species of interest. But these areas are just a starting point. So we encourage you to explore beyond these locations based on where you think you see suitable habitat. So if you see a pond or a stream or a wet meadow, even inches of standing water, that's where you want to check out these breeding habitats. After a few surveys, you'll begin to understand where you want to spend a little more focused time. So feel free to keep exploring. These particular points are just a suggestion of like where to park, where to get started. So go ahead and explore beyond that radius, but remember to avoid trespassing and respect all laws and regulations in the area. On that same project page, there's also a link to a downloadable map of these sites, so you can access it when you're in the field, even if you're outside of cell phone service. So if you wanted to see and you're out of service, whether or not you're inside a particular grid cell or not, you can do that, but it's totally optional. There's also a link on that same project page with the Choose Your Own Adventure map to sign up for these specific locations and date ranges in early, mid, and late breeding season. So we, again, can increase the chances of seeing adults, eggs, and tadpoles. And we ask that you collect data using the Survey 123 application for these dedicated site visits. There's empty rows at the bottom of this list of sites for folks to add their own location. So you don't even need to add the specific location information, but you can just give the other information that you went out, and that helps us see who's completed a survey, and we can reach out to you or you can reach out to us so we can kind of connect about who's gone where and which sites still need visiting. If you completed a dedicated site visit from the Choose Your Own Adventure map, again, please use Survey 123. It's a very quick process. So for using the Survey 123 ArcGIS application, you just download the app and make sure to hit continue without signing in. So you do not need to pay. You do not need to create a login information. You can just select that option of continue without signing in. And then we just want to encourage folks, even if you don't see any herps, to go ahead and complete that survey. This information is still really useful. So the first thing that the application asks you is your name and your email address. It will automate the date and time of the survey. It then asks you the length of time that you traveled to and from the site, as well as how long you spent looking for herps. It also asks for a description of the area you surveyed. So for an example, if you come across a huge lake and you only have 40 minutes, you can say you only surveyed or you only walked the northwest perimeter or northwest corner of the pond or lake, or you only walked a mile on the south side of the stream. That way, if you recorded lots of herps or you said that there seemed like there was lots of good habitat, but you didn't have a ton of time, we can gauge if we should prioritize that area and have our biologists go out for another visit. We ask you to fill the observed species section out. So where you can select none if you didn't observe any species, or if you observe something but you have no idea what you saw, you can say unknown. Or if you think you know what it is, you can choose from a list of herp species in Utah. It's okay if you didn't see anything, or if you do get a photo of a species you can't identify, you have that option here to select none or unknown. If you go ahead and select a common name of one of the species in Utah, it'll automatically populate that next field, the scientific name for you. When you complete an entry in the app, it will also automatically record your location of where you start recording an observation. If you see any reptile or amphibian while you're in that dedicated survey area, again, please go ahead and add that photo. You can delete a photo and add a new photo, so you can always update the image before you submit it, so you're able to edit that if you need to. And if you hear a frog call, you can record that directly in the app as well. At the end of the survey, there is a place for comments where you can add information about the number of herps you saw or any concerns you might have about the habitat you observed at the site. And finally, please let us know if the image or audio or the observation you logged is in another application, so we can be aware that there's some duplication there when we kind of pull the data together. We ask that you try to prioritize just putting the observation in survey 123 at these dedicated sites rather than in multiple applications. And then once you've done that, all that's left is to click the check mark, and that will submit your observation. If you don't hit the check mark at the end to submit before closing the app, it will prompt you to save your survey as a draft. And it will keep track of those drafts while or when you reopen the app. So you can see in the example here, right, you have the option to go back to 2 drafts that you've started, or you can collect a new point. So when you get back into, if say you're out of cell phone service, you can make edits when you're back in service, and it will still save that correct location where you actually made the observation. And then you can go ahead and submit that draft later when you're ready. Maybe you wanted to edit the photo so it's more clear. And you can go on collecting observations while you're in the field and submit those drafts later. So you have some flexibility there. Remember, if you submit 2 Survey 123 observations, you'll receive a limited edition enamel northern leopard frog pin. Another option you'll have if you follow along on the project page is to print off this volunteer surveyor informational flyer. And you can place this in your dashboard when you're doing surveys. So that way, in case you run into somebody who's wondering what you're doing out there, has questions about the project, you can direct them to that. Or if they see a car parked kind of randomly, if you have that on your dashboard, it gives them the options to learn more about the project without you having to do a bunch of explaining. So that option is there for you. All right. In our final section of the training, we're going to go over how to identify your focus species, the Columbia spotted frog and northern leopard frog, as well as their habitats. So Columbia spotted frog and northern leopard frog occupy similar aquatic or breeding habitats in Utah. Northern leopard frogs often thought to be at lower elevations than Columbia spotted frog, but there is overlap in their range and distribution. I just wanted to mention here, so you see on the left-hand side, a deeper pond surrounded by dense wetland plants, and on the right, a more shallow stream feature surrounded by wetlands. If you find yourself even in an area with just inches of standing water, you could see adult frogs, tadpoles, and even eggs. So if I were doing surveys at either of these sites for both of these locations, I would be really cautious with my steps. I would walk at the edge of the water, moving slowly, looking in the shallow portions of the water at the edge for all 3 life stages of frogs or toads. Columbia spotted frog populations are tied to aquatic habitat with perennial sources of water. Breeding usually occurs in small pools or ponds, and typically breeding sites are surrounded by dense vegetation. Floating mats of vegetation are often present, and the bottom substrate is typically deep and fine silt. Both species are most likely to be observed around small ponds and ponds with little to no current that are surrounded by dense vegetation. Floating vegetation is often present with the pond bottom typically made of that fine silt. So these are just some images to show you how well these medium-sized adult frogs can blend in even in that shallow, clear water at the edge of a pond or stream. So you can, they really look like that silt, muddy bottom, and just kind of tuck in with the vegetation. This guy here, completely underwater, just tucked in there. So for this project, we're interested in photos of any life stage. So it's really important to be observant for eggs, tadpoles, juveniles, and adults. Sometimes the juveniles, frogs and toads, are the size of your pinky fingernail, right? So really watching where you step and trying to get those images. Here we have 3 different images of egg masses at decreasing distances from left to right. So you can kind of see, I mean, these eggs really just this, I'm just going to draw it like this whole thing here is eggs, but they really blend in with that silt. And then here, the eggs are contrasting with the aquatic vegetation, so you can kind of see that a little bit better. But then even up close here, right, we've got all these different egg masses with 2 frogs mating right there in the middle. On the left, we have a well-developed Columbia spotted frog tadpole. And up close, you can kind of see that they appear dark at a distance, but up close, you can see that mottled brown copper coloring when you're up close. Here you can see some variation in color in several adults, with the individual on the left showing that striking rust accent. You can see that when you get closer. But on the right, you can count 6 individuals who at a distance really blend in with that silty, muddy bottom around the water's edge. Just to show you a little more of the color variation you might see in Columbia spotted frog in Utah, we have example photos of individuals under the surface of the water. You can see the one on the left is kind of a mustardy green, yellow looking, very similar to that submerged vegetation. And then you have the 2 individuals in amplexus or mating on the right, and they have quite a dark gray color to them. On the left, we have a cluster of mating toads at a distance, right? And these just, again, at a distance, you might not notice all these toads and eggs. And the image just really illustrates how even with lots of activity and mating individuals at a site, that they just can look like clumps of mud or silt. So walking up close in the shallow waters will be key to getting these photos. Okay, get ready. Up next, if you don't see it, but you hear it, this is the Columbia spotted frog. All right, Columbia spotted frogs, kind of like a repeated clucking or even like a knocking sound. For northern leopard frog, we're also interested in photos of any life stage. So it's important to be observant for eggs, tadpoles, juveniles, and adults for this species as well. Egg masses also free float in the water and don't have many distinguishing features at early stages from other frog eggs. So just making sure to take a photo, and then you can select unknown species in either data application. Northern leopard frog tadpoles also have kind of that dark color at a distance, and they can be dark green or brown on top with metallic speckling. Often they have a creamy underside, but again, tadpoles, similar to eggs, are very difficult to differentiate across frog species in the wild. So just taking a photo and selecting unknown for the species is likely the best option if you're taking pictures of tadpoles and eggs in the water. Here you can see some variation in color in several adults, with the individual on the left showing some striking green contrast with the dark oval spots. And on the right, you see the more brown individual who at a distance really blends in with that silty, muddy substrate and brown vegetation. Both individuals, though, they have that creamy white stripe on the upper jaw and the dorsolateral folds, or just the sides of the body. Okay, so the northern leopard frog call, they tend to have a longer call at first that some people describe as a snore, followed by a series of short croaks or chuckles. All right, and now we're on to our frequently asked questions. Wrapping up here, anyone is welcome to participate in this project. Please share this with friends and family, coworkers who may be interested, and get signed up to receive emails about the specific opportunities coming up. What species are we looking for? Please take photos using iNaturalist for any reptiles and amphibians you see when you're out and about. And then we do have those special focus species this year: Columbia spotted frog, northern leopard frog. always be on the lookout for reptiles and amphibians. So where should you look whenever you're outside? If you're recreating, you're working. We also encourage you to sign up for that Choose Your Own Adventure designated sites in that map to help fill in the gaps in our understanding of where those focused species are on the landscape. So just a reminder, for any reptile amphibian species you see, use the iNaturalist application. For those designated sites where you sign up for those specific focus species, please use Survey 123. If you're out herping a lot, looking for reptiles and amphibians, and you have those concerns about protecting certain locations or sensitive species, go ahead and use that Survey 123 app, and those data go to the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources rather than a public page. Remember, all these data you're helping us gather about these species help us prioritize where habitat protections or restoration activities take place as we engage in conservation planning for these often overlooked species. And remember, you can always reach out to us with any questions you have as you engage with this project. Additionally, I just want to share a link to a survey for anyone who works out on the landscape and might encounter reptiles and amphibians. So we've got wetland managers and other wildlife and habitat managers. We really would appreciate it if you would take the survey, and we can support you or others in your organization who may have a need or already have information about Utah's reptiles and amphibians. We have an exciting opportunity to help survey for desert iguana coming up in May. Our partners at Utah Hogle Zoo will be hosting 2 dates in April for Western Tone specific training. So you can grab the QR code there. And we have a day in April and in May planned where you can join biologist guided surveys. If you've signed up for the webinar or signed up for the HerpSearch newsletter and emails, you will get reminders for registering for each of these events I just mentioned. And with that, I would like to open it up to any questions. Please go ahead and use the chat, or if you found the Q&A function, either one, we will make sure we get to answering those. Thank you so much.
All right. Great job, Mary. Great job, Mary, Alyssa, and Megan. We do have one question in the chat that I think everyone could benefit from hearing about, because I asked for uploading photos of eggs or tadpoles that are a little bit harder to identify in that life stage. Should those be uploaded to Survey 123 or to iNaturalist?
I would say either of those is just fine. So the distinction with the two apps is if you're just out and about and you see eggs or you see a snake or you see anything, just go ahead and use iNaturalist. That's probably the easiest. And then for those of you who haven't used it, once you get a photo up and you put, like, say you saw frog eggs and you're, say, unknown species, once a photo's up, the community is helping you identify that. When it comes to frog eggs, it's very tricky. So that would be an interesting conversation. But either way, we'd probably be going back to check out that site and see if we could see adults and tadpoles. So the distinction is iNaturalist, if you're just out and about and you see something. Survey 123, please make sure you use that if you are at one of those designated sites that you signed up for, the Choose Your Own Adventure map sites.
Thank you, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Another great question from Christiana, and I think this is what all of us are thinking right now. Is it too early to start, or with this beautiful weather, do you think we can start now?
You want me to answer it? Okay. Yeah, you can definitely start now. I was actually just out this week helping out with a survey for Columbia spotted frogs within a known population. And then we also know within the Wasatch Front area that we're already seeing like staging, meaning that adults are arriving at their breeding pools and breeding ponds to call for females to mate and produce fertilized eggs. So we're already seeing that and seeing eggs around this area too. eggs you could probably find in the morning anytime, but it seems like adults are maybe popping out when it gets a little bit warmer, maybe in the afternoon. So there's also that question. Yeah, and I did see best time of day for observing frogs, so I kind of covered that. But as the weather starts to warm up too, in the morning hours, you'll want to switch it to more morning times. But right now, I'd probably suggest afternoons is probably the best time if you want to find adults.
Thank you, Alyssa. And there was a chat question earlier that you were addressing about different map platforms. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was trying to figure it out. I was able to download a section. I need to see if I can upload that in Avenza. I guess I'm not familiar with crossing from field maps to Avenza and whether or not you can download that. So I'm trying to look into that. I don't know, Megan, if you're familiar with downloading a map in field maps and then uploading it in Avenza. Is that possible?
I think you can with to download it and then upload it to ESRI, but the file is pretty big. It's like a something K file. I can look it up really quickly. But if your reason for using Avenza is because you're somewhere that doesn't have cell service, if you're using the Survey 123 app and you mark that point, it will mark the point that you're at where you don't have service, and then it will upload when you do have service. So if that's your reason for using Avenza, you can actually, Survey 123 has that same functionality.
All right, perfect. Any additional questions? There are no stupid questions. I have asked a lot of questions, and none of our biologists have ever called me stupid. So please ask. Something I would love to know from our amazing partners is a little bit more like, how do you recommend when people are going out independently, how do they walk around a wetland? Like, is it okay to go off trail? Is that encouraged? Should people wear waders or boots, or what protocol would you suggest if people aren't going out on a guided survey with biologists?
Yeah, I just want to stress the like safety is point number one. So just make sure you feel comfortable doing what you're doing. Preference would be that you have at least two people and you're not by yourself. There's some notes about this kind of thing at the top of the sign up page, but um, yeah, when you approach a site, we had some images that show more shallow water, and then there's places with deeper water. If you're familiar with chest waders and you feel really comfortable tromping around in hip and chest deep water, like go for it. But also watch out for where you're stepping so that you're not stepping on these tiny little froglets that just absorb their tails or eggs or things like that. If that's not something you're comfortable with and it's not something you've done before, you can still really help with these surveys by just walking carefully in inches of water in muck boots, right? And you can also just walk the edge of streams or ponds and stay completely dry and just crouch down and really have a slow, thoughtful look where you have shallow, clear water with some submerged vegetation. That's where you're going to see, especially the focus species we're looking for. But again, we're interested in all kinds of things. So if people report snakes that they've seen dead or alive on the road, or other amphibians and reptiles, if you're just out hiking with your family and you notice inches of water, take a look, see if there's eggs or tadpoles in there. So you don't have to be so extreme that you're wearing chest waders and in the middle of nowhere. There's something for everybody here.
Thank you, Mary. And I will also stress, if you are brand new to this, I definitely recommend going out on a guided survey. And Utah Zoo, they have the Western Toad Project that gives you that great opportunity. That's how I learned how to walk around wetlands. And they're so good at explaining and showing you how to do that in a really safe and comfortable setting. And I do believe they have a lot of opportunities to get involved this summer. So that's a good place to start if you want to kind of dip your toes into the water. Um, Jennifer also asks, are frogs limited to certain elevations? She knows that toads are higher up, but what about the frogs?
Yeah, so frogs can, they're found in lower elevations that toads are not going to be found, but they can also be found in those upper elevations, like up to 10,000, 11,000 feet. So it wouldn't be uncommon to find them in those areas, but lower elevation, like I was saying, I was out in the West Desert, and it wasn't up in those high elevation areas. It was in the more arid places where there were springs. So, yeah, I guess you're the what's the phrasing? I'm skipping my mind, but the world's your oyster when it comes to finding frogs, I guess, on the landscape.
I love that. They could be anywhere. We don't know. That's why we're asking you to help. And Marcella asks, we know we shouldn't handle animals, but for getting good tadpole photos, any suggestions?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't handle tadpoles and eggs. I I do think if you can get a photo where you don't pick up the glare on the water, and actually Sierra is the photographer here. Some of the amazing photos you saw in here were Sierra's and lots from Caitlin Purrington at Division of Wildlife Resources. But yeah, if you can try to avoid getting the glare off the water, so whatever angle you need to get to so that you can get those tadpole and egg images. But again, they are really tricky to distinguish. So if you get if you get a photo where we can actually see eggs and tadpoles, you're doing great. We're not going to be identifying them from the field very easily. So that it's a case where we're coming back and trying to make sure we see adults in most cases.
And Kaylani of Utah's Total Zoo says taking photos through polarized sunglasses can help. Life hack. I'm going to try that out. I'm always looking for ways to reduce the glare. Um,
Yeah, and I want to add to sometimes depending on the area that you found, like the tadpoles or the eggs, that can lead us to a process of elimination too on what species they could be. So even if it's because tadpoles are really difficult to identify, and so even with the photo, it could be a little tough, but that also helps based on where it's found in the state.
Amazing. Tom asks, in one of the photos, it looked like someone had their hand underneath the eggs to give contrast. Is that recommended? And I will say that many of the photos that we pulled for this presentation came from iNaturalist. Community members can give copyright permissions to nonprofits, and we are very grateful for that. So I will let our biologists speak on that. Should we be using our hands for contrast on egg photos?
I don't think it will be necessary to do that, especially, if you do Keelani's life hack with the polarized lenses, which I also would recommend if you're looking in water to use polarized lenses because it really does give you a good viewpoint when searching for eggs or even tadpoles. So, yeah, my recommendation would be minimal contact. Try not to touch the eggs. It's not necessary for us to be able to ID it. And a lot of times for biologists, sometimes we'll wear gloves just to kind of make sure we're getting an accurate egg mass count, but it's very rare that we actually need to do that.
Thank you, Alyssa. Cami asks, to join a biologist-led Western Toad Survey, do you need to do the in-person training? And Mary, if you maybe click back one slide, I do believe it is required or highly recommended. Definitely scan this QR code. That will take you to the Hodel Zoo's Western Toad Project page, where you can learn more about those trainings, sign up, and get involved there. Or you can reach out to Kaylani and she can answer your questions. But it's a great time. Highly recommend. Any other questions?
To take a moment to
Thank you for the note about the guide to photographing. We are updating that based on updated Division of Wildlife recommendations. So we will have that up and working shortly. Thank you, Jennifer. Any other thoughts before we wrap this up? I know we're all just so excited to get out there and look at some herps. All right, Kaylani notes in the chat, highly recommend in-person, but online videos will be released after the in-person dates for Hodel Zoo-led surveys, and her email is in the chat if you have any further questions. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up, but thank you all so much for celebrating World Frog Day with us and for contributing to amphibian and reptile conservation here in Utah. We couldn't do this without you, and we are so excited for another amazing field season. So you will be getting a follow-up email with the link to this recording and with all of the great resources that we talked about today, but please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions in the meantime. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.